The river doesn't forgive. That's the first thing anyone learns in Laramie County, Wyoming, if they're paying attention. The North Platte runs cold and indifferent through that high plains country, cutting its own path through whatever stands in the way. Sandstone, cottonwood root, the careful plans of men who thought they understood the land. It has no interest in what you wanted, only in what is. Owen Bassett had learned that lesson the hard way. He was 44 years old, and he lived alone on a cattle spread 7 miles east of the town of Delwood, in a house that was solidly built and completely empty. Not empty of furniture, he had what he needed. Empty the way a room goes empty when the person who gave it meaning is no longer there. His wife, Ruth, had died 3 winters ago. Pneumonia, the kind that comes fast and argues with nothing. 1 week she was hanging laundry in the October wind. 2 weeks later, the ground was frozen, and Owen was standing beside a mound of it with his hat in his hands, trying to remember how to breathe. He was not a man given to self-pity. He had kept the ranch running. He had kept the cattle fed and the fence repaired and the accounts settled. He had done everything a functioning man does in the correct order with adequate competence, but somewhere in the doing of it he had also quietly stopped expecting anything to matter. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone would notice. He just went about his life the way you go about a job you no longer believe in. Thoroughly, because that was the kind of man he was, but without any real expectation of the work meaning something. He was at the fence line on the north pasture, mending a break the wind had opened up overnight when the wagon came down the road. He heard it before he saw it, the creak and pull of a rig being driven carefully, not in a hurry but with purpose. He straightened up and watched. The wagon was old but maintained. The kind of vehicle that had been repaired so many times it was difficult to tell what was original. The horse pulling it was a gray mare with a sensible gait and more years on her than she looked. The woman driving was not who he expected. She was young, somewhere in her middle 20s, he guessed, with dark hair pulled back under a flat-brimmed hat and the kind of posture that comes not from comfort but from having learned, very specifically, not to show discomfort. She pulled the mare to a stop at his fence gate and looked at him with dark, even eyes. "Are you Owen Bassett?" she said. "Depends on who's asking." "My name is Phoebe Whitehorse," she said. "My father was Joseph Whitehorse. He drove supply freight up through this valley for 12 years. He died 6 weeks ago." She paused, then said the thing she had clearly been practicing. "Before he died, he told me to find you. He said you owed him a conversation." Owen set down his fencing pliers. He looked at the woman on the wagon seat for a long moment, and then he looked at the road behind her as if checking whether any of this made sense. "Joseph's gone," he said. "It was not a question." "Yes." He looked back at her. The hat, the careful posture, the eyes that didn't waver. Joseph Whitehorse's daughter. He could see it now. Something in the set of the jaw, the patience behind the gaze. "A conversation," Owen said slowly. "That's all he said." "He said a great deal more than that," Phoebe replied. "But that's the part he said to lead with, because he knew you'd be suspicious of anything more specific." Owen almost said something. He stopped. Then he unlatched the gate. "Pull it up to the barn," he said. "I'll hear what he had to say." Joseph Whitehorse had been one of those men who are difficult to categorize and easy to underestimate. He was Shoshone on his mother's side and Irish on his father's, which had made him belong completely to neither world and navigate both with a particular kind of quiet fluency. He had driven freight through the Platte River Valley for over a decade, which meant he knew every ranch, every family, every stretch of bad road between Delwood and the Wyoming-Colorado line. He knew which ranchers paid fair and which ones found reasons not to. He knew which women were lonely and which men were cruel, and which homesteads would be gone in 5 years because the people in them had come to Wyoming with the wrong idea about what the land asked of you. He had known Owen Bassett for 11 years. They had not been close friends in the way people imagine friendship. There had been no long evenings of conversation, no letters exchanged, but there had been something steadier than that. Joseph had driven supplies out to the Bassett spread twice a year, every year, without fail, in weather that discouraged lesser men. He had been at Ruth's funeral, hat in hand, standing at the back. He had checked on Owen the following spring with the simple directness of a man who understood that grief was not a problem to be solved, but a weight to be acknowledged. He had said only, "How are you holding up?" And Owen had said, "Getting through it." And Joseph had nodded, because that was an honest answer, and Joseph Whitehorse had no patience for any other kind. Phoebe had known none of this detail. She had only known her father. She knew him as the man who came home smelling of road dust and horse and distance, who brought her small things from towns she'd never seen. A ribbon, a carved wooden bird, once a book of botanical illustrations that she had studied until the binding gave out. She knew him as the man who had taught her to read a map and drive a team and navigate by stars, because he said a woman alone in the world needed to know where she was at all times. She had not understood when he said these things that he was preparing her specifically. She understood it now. She sat at Owen's kitchen table and handed him the letter. It was written in Joseph's hand, compact and deliberate, a man who had taught himself to write in his 40s and trusted every word he committed to paper because he knew what it had cost him to learn them. Owen, if you're reading this, my girl made it to you, which means she did what she was told, which is something she doesn't always do, so you know this was important to her too. Her name is Phoebe. She is 26 years old. She is the best person I ever raised, and I did not raise her well enough for the world to handle her fairly, which is a thing I regret. She has a situation. The freight contracts died with me. That's the law, and I have no argument with it. Her mother's people are in the Wind River country, and they will take her in, but she would have to leave behind everything she knows and start over as a stranger in a place she loves but does not fully belong to. The towns will not hire her for anything worth having. I looked into it before I got too sick to look. I thought of you because you are honest and because your spread is struggling with one pair of hands, and I watched you work for 11 years, and you are a man who does not waste what is useful. Phoebe can drive, repair, keep accounts, and work a full day without complaint. She speaks 3 languages if you count this hand talk the freighters use on the trail. What I am asking is 1 season of fair work and honest pay. After that, she chooses her own road. I also want to say this because I am dying and have run out of patience for leaving things unsaid. You have been alone too long, Owen. Ruth would agree with me. I am not telling you what to feel. I am telling you not to be afraid of it. That is what I have to say. I trust you to do right by her. Joseph. Owen read it twice. He folded it with great care and set it on the table between them. Phoebe was watching him with the same calm she had shown at the gate, not performing patience, but actually possessing it, which was something different entirely. He told you what was in it? Owen asked. He told me some of it, not all. She paused. He said if he told me all of it, I'd argue with him about the parts I didn't like. Was he right? Probably. She looked at the letter, then back at him. I am not here looking for anything except what the letter says. Work, fair pay, 1 season. After that, I go where I decide. Owen was quiet for a moment. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved through the tall grass with a long, dry sound that he had spent 3 winters hearing only as loneliness. There's a room off the back of the barn, he said at last. It's got a good stove, and the roof doesn't leak. You can have it. He stood and carried his coffee cup to the counter and stood looking out the window at the north pasture. Breakfast is at first light. If you're not up, I don't wait. He heard her chair push back. I'll be up, she said. He didn't turn around. I know, he said, and meant it, though he couldn't have explained why. If you've ever lost someone the way Owen lost Ruth, suddenly in the middle of an ordinary life, then you know the specific cruelty of the small things. Not the big grief, not the funeral or the first winter or the first Christmas alone. The small things. The habit of making 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. The reflex of turning to say something and finding no one there. Owen had 3 years of those reflexes, and he had learned to let them pass through him without expression, the way you let a wind gust pass. You feel it, you brace, and then you stand still again. What he was not prepared for was the sound of someone else in the house. Not intrusive sound. Phoebe was quiet in the way people who have lived in tight quarters learn to be quiet, aware of the space she occupied and careful about it. But there were small noises that told him she was there, the even rhythm of her footsteps in the morning, earlier than he expected. The particular way the barn door opened and closed. The smell of coffee when he came in from the first check on the cattle, because she had made it without being asked. He watched her work the way you watch weather, carefully, from a distance. She did not ask for instruction where instruction wasn't needed. The first morning, she looked at the barn, the hay that needed moving, the stalls that needed mucking, the saddle that had been improperly rehung, and simply started at one end and worked toward the other. She did not perform busyness. She was actually busy in the concentrated and efficient way of someone who had worked since she was old enough to be useful. On the third day, he noticed the fence along the eastern draw. He had been meaning to fix it for 2 weeks. It was a stretch he passed every day, and every day he cataloged what it needed, and every day something else was more pressing. He came around the rise on horseback that afternoon and found Phoebe there with a post driver and a coil of wire, working her way down the line with complete unhurried focus. She had already done 40 yards. She had another 60 to go. He pulled his horse up and watched for a moment. She looked up, registered that he was there, and went back to work. He rode on. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. What surprised him most was the account book. He had kept accounts the way a tired man keeps accounts, accurately but without system, entries made when he remembered and sometimes when he didn't. On the second Friday, he came inside from evening chores to find Phoebe at the kitchen table with the account book open and a pencil in her hand. She looked up without flinching. "You're missing 3 months of feed receipts," she said, "and you've been overpaying the Delwood Co-op by 11 cents a bushel on corn since last spring." He looked at her. "I can fix both," she said, "if you want me to." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "My wife kept the books," he said. "It came out more simply than he intended." "I know," Phoebe said, and then carefully, "My father told me. He said she was very good at it." She set the pencil down. "I'm not trying to replace anything. I'm just trying to do the work." Owen looked at the account book for a long moment. 11 cents a bushel," he said. "Since April." He almost smiled. He stopped himself, but it was close. "Fix it," he said. It happened on a night in the 3rd week, the way these things tend to happen. Not in a dramatic moment, but in a quiet one. He had built a fire in the outdoor ring that he used for burning brush, and it had burned down to the good low coals that a fire reaches when it has stopped trying to prove something. He was sitting with it, not thinking exactly, just being in the same space as the warmth, when he heard her come around the side of the barn. She stopped when she saw him, not retreating, just checking whether she was welcome. He didn't tell her to go. She came and sat on the far end of the log he was using as a bench, and she looked at the fire the way her father had looked at long distances on the road. Not searching them, just resting in them. After a while she said, "He used to say a good fire was the only honest company." "Joseph?" "Yes." Owen looked at the coals. He had heard things like that from Joseph over the years, half-observations delivered without ceremony, the kind of thing you didn't know you were going to remember until you did. "He was a stubborn man," Owen said. "Yes," she said it with something that was almost a smile. "He came by it honestly. His mother was worse." They sat with the fire for a while longer. "He talked about you," Phoebe said eventually. "On the road when we drove together, he said you were the kind of man who did right by people even when no one was looking. He said that was rarer than it should be. He was too generous." "He was precise," she said. "He didn't use words to be kind. He used them to be accurate." She paused. "There's a difference." Owen looked across the fire at her. She was watching the coals, not him, with the particular quality of presence she had. Fully there without demanding anything from the space she was in. "What will you do?" he asked after the season. "Where will you go?" She was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was even but not entirely. "I used to know," she said. "I had a plan. Before he got sick, I thought I knew what the next few years looked like." She stopped. The plan was built around him being in it. When that changed, the plan stopped making sense. She looked up at the night sky. The stars over Wyoming in September are unreasonable. Too many and too close, the kind of sky that makes the ground feel very small. I think I'm looking for something that feels like mine, she said. Not borrowed, not temporary. Something I could plant in and expect it to still be there in 10 years. Owen said nothing, but something in his chest moved, not dramatically but distinctly, the way a gate moves when the latch gives without warning. He did not say good night when he went inside. He never did. But he sat in the kitchen for a long time before he went to bed, and he didn't think about the fence or the accounts or the cattle. Now here's the thing about that conversation I keep coming back to. It wasn't what was said. It was what wasn't said. Two people sitting in the same honest silence, which is one of the rarest things there is. Joseph knew what he was doing when he sent her. I think he'd known for years. They went into Delwood together on the 1st of October for supplies. Owen had been dreading it. He knew the town, which meant he knew its tendencies, the careful watching, the conclusions drawn from limited information, the way a small community protects itself by measuring anyone who doesn't fit its existing categories. He could feel it as they walked from the wagon to Hargrove's general store. Not hostility, exactly, more like assessment. The particular attention of people who have already decided something and are looking for evidence to confirm it. Inside, old Mr. Hargrove himself was pleasant enough. His wife was less so, not rude, but the kind of neutral that communicates a great deal. The trouble came from a man named Clifton Price. Price owned land 3 miles south of town and had the bearing of someone who considered himself important in proportion to how recently he had been challenged on it. He was standing near the door when they came out with their supplies, and he said what he said loudly enough for the two women on the opposite boardwalk to hear. Owen set down the crate he was carrying. He turned to look at Price with the particular steadiness of a man who has made a decision and is not in any hurry to announce it. "That's Phoebe Whitehorse," Owen said plainly and without heat. "She is the finest worker on my spread, and I'd put her accounts up against anyone in this county. You'll want to step back from my wagon." Price looked at him for a long moment, measuring. Then he stepped back. They loaded the rest of the supplies without further discussion. On the road home, the silence between them was a different shape from the silences that had come before it. Fuller, somehow. More weight to it, but not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that has something living in it. "You didn't need to do that," Phoebe said. "No." "Then why?" Owen kept his eyes on the road. The long gold grass ran out on either side of them in the afternoon light, and the mountains in the west were the particular shade of blue they go in October, when the light starts slanting. "Because it was true," he said, "and because some things need witnesses." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the road. She didn't say anything, but something in how she was sitting changed. Not relaxed, exactly, but settled, the way a horse settles when it decides the ground is trustworthy. The drawings came out in the 5th week. He hadn't meant to see them. He had come in from the pasture early because a front was coming in from the north and he wanted to get the hay covered, and he nearly walked into her. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a stick of charcoal, and she looked up with the calm of someone caught doing something private but not shameful. He stopped and looked at what she had made. It was the ranch. The whole spread laid out from some vantage point above and to the east, the barn, the house, the fence line, the draw, the cottonwood that grew at the corner of the south pasture and that Owen had been meaning to cut down for years because one of the big limbs was going, but had never been able to bring himself to do it. All of it rendered in clean, unhurried lines, as if someone had looked at a place and decided to actually see it. "Joseph taught you," he said. He learned from his mother. She didn't put it away or explain it. He said if you can draw something, you've made yourself pay attention to it. Most people look, very few see. Owen studied the paper, the old cottonwood in the corner. She had drawn it carefully, the lean of the trunk, the way the compromised branch reached out farther than it should. "You saw everything," he said. "I was paying attention," she said simply. He looked at the drawing a moment longer. "You're spending your afternoons fixing fence," he said. This is what you should be doing. A person needs both, Phoebe said. The fence is the work. The drawing is why the work matters. He set the drawing back down with a care that neither of them remarked on. Could you draw something for me? He said. What do you want? He thought for a moment, then he shook his head. Surprise me, he said. Draw whatever you see. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the charcoal. She gave it to him 4 days later. It was the kitchen window. His kitchen window, the one he stood at every morning with his coffee, looking out at the north pasture. She had drawn it from outside, the view through the glass into the kitchen, the familiar table, the stove, the row of hooks where his coat and her hat now both hung, side by side, an arrangement that had arrived without being decided, and at the window barely indicated, just the suggestion of shape, a figure looking out, a man looking out at something he couldn't see from inside. That evening, she wasn't at supper. He found her at the barn, sitting in the open doorway, watching the storm front move in from the north. Her expression was doing something complicated, and she didn't try to hide it. Phoebe. She looked up. Her eyes were clear, but only recently. I need to tell you something my father left out of the letter, she said. Owen sat on the fence rail beside her, not close, but present. He didn't tell you the whole situation, she said. A man named Greer, who works as a land agent for the county, told me before my father was even buried that a woman of my particular background has no standing in Laramie County without formal employment on a documented property. He gave me until the end of the season to find a situation or face being directed to the reservation at Lander. Owen was very still. Your father knew this. Yes. And he didn't put it in the letter. She looked at him steadily, and her voice was level and honest. He knew that if you were keeping me here because you felt obligated, it wouldn't be a real choice. For either of us, he wanted you to decide to keep me here before you knew you might have to. Owen looked out at the coming storm. The sky in the northwest was the particular blue-black of serious weather, and the wind was already changing. That is the thing about Joseph Whitehorse that I cannot stop thinking about. A man dying, in pain, planning this carefully, not because he wanted to manipulate anyone, but because he understood both of these people well enough to know that the only version of this that worked was the one where the choice was real. That is the kind of faith in people that most of us only aspire to. He rode to Delwood alone the next morning. He went to the county recorder's office and asked about the land agent Greer's claim. The clerk confirmed it quietly and then added, with the careful tone of a man offering information without technically offering advice, that such a claim could be challenged if the woman in question was employed under formal contract on an established ranch, or, alternatively, if her status changed by other means. Thanked him and rode home so slowly, giving the horse its head through the long grass. He knew what he was going to say before he reached the gate, not because the legal situation required it, not because Joseph's letter had started him on this path, but because he had spent 3 years being a man who had stopped expecting the future to hold anything worth having, and he was quietly, irrevocably done with that. He found her at the barn, working a new edge onto his good skinning knife, a job that required attention and didn't tolerate distraction. Phoebe. She set the stone down and looked at him. He leaned against the fence rail and looked at her directly. I don't want you to leave when the season ends. She was quiet for a moment. She set the knife down carefully. What does that mean? She said. Not suspicious, not hopeful. Just careful in the way of a person who has been hopeful before and knows what it costs. It means this ranch is better than it was 6 weeks ago, he said, and not because of the fence or the accounts. It means that drawing you made of my window is the first thing I've looked at in 3 years that made me feel like I was still actually living in my life. He looked at the ground, then back at her. It means I have been alone long enough that I almost forgot what it felt like to want something, and I don't want to forget again. She was still for a moment. I told myself I wouldn't let this happen, she said. Neither did I. I don't know what I am to you, she said. I came here as a hired hand. I don't know the word for what this is. Neither do I, he said honestly. But I think you have to decide what you want first before you know what to call it. She looked at him for a long time. The way she looked at the ranch when she was drawing it, not quickly, but with full attention, finding the true structure beneath the worn surface. "My father said you were a good man," she said quietly. "He was too generous." He was precise. She picked up the knife and the whetstone again and turned them over in her hands without resuming work. "I'll think about it," she said. It was not a yes, but it was not a no, and for the first time in 3 years, Owen Bassett was afraid of something that was not loss, that was new. He stood there for a moment in the afternoon light, registering it. Then he went back to work. The land agent Greer came on a Wednesday with a deputy and a piece of paper. Owen was not surprised. He had been watching the road since the week before, and the man who had stood watching them outside the general store in Delwood had, Owen was certain, been in Greer's employ. Small men with small power conduct their business through observation and timing. Owen had known the type his whole life. Greer went straight past Owen toward the barn, which told Owen everything he needed to know about the man's habits and intentions. "End of season was yesterday," Greer said, directing himself at Phoebe. "The Carter arrangement isn't formal. It doesn't hold on county record. I'll need her to come with." "She's not going anywhere," Owen said. He had not moved fast. He was simply there between Greer and Phoebe, with the settled certainty of a man who had already decided how this conversation ended. Greer looked at him. "This isn't your concern, Bassett. The woman doesn't have documented standing on this." "She has documented standing as my intended," Owen said, "which makes it entirely my concern and not at all yours." The word dropped into the cold morning air. Behind him, Phoebe made no sound. Greer looked from Owen to her and back. He was the kind of man who measured risk carefully and retreated when the numbers shifted. The numbers had just shifted. "I'll need to see documentation," Greer said, falling back into the language of process. "You'll have it," Owen said. "Good morning." Greer left. The deputy went with him. Owen turned around. Phoebe was looking at him with an expression he could not fully read, something at the intersection of exasperated and startled and something else that hadn't settled into a name yet. "You should have asked first," she said. "I know." She looked at him for a long moment. The wind came through the barn with a thin, cold edge, October becoming November in real time. "Ask me now," she said. He asked her. Standing in the barn doorway with the Wyoming sky behind him going white with the promise of early snow, he asked her in the way that was true to both of them, without ceremony, without performance, in the plain language of a man who meant every word he was saying. "I am not an easy man," he said. "I'm set in my ways and I talk less than most people are comfortable with, and I spent 3 years turning myself into someone who didn't need anything from anyone, and I'm not fully clear of that yet. I can't promise you everything." He paused. "But I can promise you that I will see you, actually see you, every day. And I think that's worth something." She looked at him for a long time. "My father knew," she said softly, "didn't he?" "I think he knew before either of us did." "Stubborn old man," she said. "Yes," Owen said. She looked past him at the sky for a moment, and when she looked back, something had settled in her expression. Not certainty exactly, but the decision that comes just before certainty arrives. "Yes," she said. They were married in Delwood in November in the county courthouse, with the recorder acting as witness and old Mr. Hargrove's wife standing at the back. She had come, Owen learned later, because she had watched the scene with Clifton Price and had decided something about Owen Bassett that day that she had not previously been willing to decide. Small towns remember. They record what they see and they revise their conclusions slowly, and they almost never announce it when they do, but they remember. The ranch changed after that, not all at once. But the accounts were in order, genuinely for the first time in years. The eastern draw fence held through the first hard winter. A small garden went in along the south wall of the house in the spring, compact and organized with the same attention to line and structure that appeared in the drawings she tacked to the kitchen wall. 4 of them now, including one of Owen at the fence line that he hadn't known she was making. She had caught the particular way he stood when he was thinking about something, weight slightly back, one hand on the post, looking at the middle distance, seeing what wasn't there yet. And in the late spring, when the North Platte was running high and cold with snowmelt, and the grass was coming in thick on the north pasture, Phoebe told him. She said it simply, the way she said everything that mattered. Standing at the kitchen window in the early morning, coffee in hand, watching the light come over the eastern ridge. Owen stood very still for a moment. His hands were around his cup, and the morning was very quiet, and the world outside the window was the pale gold color it gets in Wyoming in May, before the heat arrives. Then he set his cup down on the counter. He crossed the kitchen. He put his arms around her from behind, carefully, the way a man holds something he has been afraid, for a very long time he would never have. Not dramatically, not with words, just held her there in the early light while the ranch went about its morning outside, and the river ran where it would, and the grass grew in the way grass grows when the ground is good. Joseph Whitehorse had known. He had known from 11 years of watching Owen Bassett do right by people when no one was looking. He had known from watching his daughter move through a world that offered her poor options and hold herself with the dignity of someone waiting for the right one. He had trusted two people he loved with the most important thing he had left to give, the chance to find each other. And he had done it with the kind of faith that does not require certainty. Out in the long grass, the North Platte ran where it always ran, cold and indifferent and honest. But in that kitchen, in that moment, there was nothing cold in the world. I've thought about Joseph Whitehorse a lot since I first told this story. Not about what he did, the letter, the plan, the careful way he arranged things before he died. I've thought about what it took to do it. A man in pain, running out of time, choosing to spend what little clarity he had left not on his own comfort but on the future of someone else. That's not a small thing. That's actually one of the hardest things there is. What strikes me is that Joseph didn't do what would have been easier. He could have put everything in that letter, the land agent, the deadline, the real stakes, and Owen would have had no choice but to act. The situation would have forced the outcome. But Joseph understood something that most people miss. A choice that's forced isn't really a choice. And a life built on obligation instead of wanting is a life that slowly hollows out. He had watched Owen Bassett for 11 years. He knew what that hollowing looked like. He refused to let his daughter walk into another version of it. That's wisdom. Not the kind you read about, the kind you earn by paying attention to people long enough to actually understand them. And then there's Phoebe. 26 years old, her father 6 weeks in the ground, driving a wagon alone across Wyoming to knock on the gate of a man she'd never met. I don't think people give enough credit to what that kind of courage actually costs. It's easy to be brave when you have options. It's something else entirely to show up with cracked boots and a practiced speech and the full knowledge that this might not work. And show up anyway. She didn't perform strength. She just had it, the kind built from years of doing hard things without an audience. And Owen. A man who had decided, somewhere in the long grief after Ruth, that wanting things was too dangerous, that it was safer to be competent and empty than to risk being full again and lose it. I know that feeling. I think a lot of people listening to this know it. The decision to stop wanting isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles in, quietly, until one day you realize you've been going through the motions of a life without actually living inside it. What changed Owen wasn't a single moment. It was accumulation, the fence she fixed without being asked, the accounts that finally made sense, the drawing of his own window that showed him a man still standing inside his life, still looking outward. Small things, added up honestly, over time. That's how people actually change. Not in one dramatic turn, but in the slow daily choosing to stay open. There's a reason this story ends the way it does. Joseph trusted two people with something fragile and important, and they were each, in their own way, worthy of that trust. Phoebe because she was honest about what she needed and never asked for more. Owen because when the moment came, he chose, really chose, before he knew he had to want something again. I think that's the thing worth carrying. Not the romance, not even the happy ending. Just this, the kind of person you are when no one is watching is the foundation that everything else eventually gets built on. Joseph knew that about Owen. Owen didn't fully know it about himself. Phoebe figured it out in 5 weeks of paying attention. That's how it works. You become the thing you practice being in the small moments when the stakes seem low. And then one day the stakes aren't low at all, and you find out who you've made yourself into. I hope you're making yourself into someone you'd trust.